and have straps around his shoulder to hold it. That was pretty nice music. And he had a monkey, and that monkey was sure well trained, and he had it dressed up real cute, you know, had dressed up like a bellhop in the hotel. And that monkey would go up and take money out of people's hands, they'd offer to it, and then it'd put it in its pocket, and then it would tip its hat to the people. Well, we gotta go. Boy, I wish the kids today could see the monkeys, those organ-grinders. Boy, they were great. Once in a while, I'd play hooky from school. And, I always had to have an excuse to take to the teacher. Well, my friend Jim Davis, he said he'd write the excuse, but he wouldn't sign it. So he wrote it, and I guess I signed it. I don't know. I didn't do that very much. I was just afraid of getting caught. We used to raid the farmers' watermelon patches, you know, and then we'd pick his fruit, and it didn't seem to be stealing. It just seemed to be the thing to do for kids, it is. I remember one time we went at nighttime and to a farmer's watermelon patch. We had to go a long ways around to get to it because we didn't want to go past his house. So we went through fields and barbed wire fences and ditches, and at nighttime. And boy, we were a mess by the time we got back. And we had a bunch of little round watermelons. They were not the long type, they were the round type. And we got back to where we'd started and cut them open, and every one of them was green. But we used to get all kinds of fruit and stuff from the farmers' field. It seemed like we'd walk through their field and pick stuff as we went through and eat it. Well, that's something we done one time. We went to a kid come along. He had a buckboard and a wagon, you know, a small wagon was pulled by one horse. And we went with him and we went uptown and went in the alley, and we got in a shed behind the lumber yard. And we took out a bundle of cement sacks, empty cement sacks. And we took them sacks away and out in the field, and we shook them out and rearranged them and took them back into the front door of that same lumber yard and sold them to them. We got 15 cents a piece. Well, that was kind of a dirty trick to play, I guess. But we didn't do all good things then, but we just didn't pull stunts like that sometimes. Well, those cement sacks, it's kind of interesting. They, they fill the sacks before they sew them up. Or rather, they sew them up first, then they fill the sack. And I think they do it today with paper sacks the same way. They sew them up, except up to a very corner. They leave a fold of material in the corner, and they put a tube in there, and they fill that up, sack up to there, and then the cement lays against that fold that keeps it from coming out. That's kind of an interesting thing. We used to hang on wagons and buggies a lot, and we were always hanging on wagons. And we'd hang on to buggies too, and little buggies, pulled by one horse. They had a top on it. We'd sit in that little box in the back. It's only about 2 foot wide and a foot deep. But we'd sit in there, and the farmer would go along there, and he'd whip the horse, and they'd whip it, come around, and cross our face sometimes. We had to watch out for that, because that hurt, that stuff did. We used to always have a lunch on Easter. We'd take it and go somewhere. Seemed like the more eggs you had, the better Easter lunch you had. We'd always be asking each other, how many eggs you're going to have Easter? We'd always have some cake, though. Cake and eggs and the sandwiches. I remember eating some in the barn one time. It was raining that day, so that's where we had our Easter lunch. We used to play tricks on Halloween, too, and our favorite trick was to tip over outhouses. We'd gang of us get together, tip over an outhouse and then run. And one time we took over an old man. He had a little old man, he was. And his name was Pilati. I guess he was Italian. And he had a piano box for an outhouse. And we took that piano box and we carried it a long ways away. Well, next day I seen him going down the street with that thing on a wheelbarrow. He was wheeling it back home on a wheelbarrow. Another time we tipped over an outhouse, and we all run, and someone come out and fired a shot. And just as he shot, I stumbled. I was the last one. Just as he shot, I stumbled. And boy, the rest ought to have been shot, because they stopped and all come back. One time was hanging on a pie wagon. A guy delivered pies. He had a one horse and had a wagon, it was closed in like a panel delivery. And he opened the back end and they had a step there. Well, we was hanging on that, three of us, sitting on that, actually standing on it, I guess, on that step on the back. That guy, he stopped the horse and run around there and caught us. Well, I figured we'd be going to jail or something for that, but he just got in the truck and he gave us each a pie, a whole pie for each one of us. Good pies, too. I guess no one knows that I was in the movies at one time. Seemed like in this little town of Murray way, they had a volunteer fire department, and they were probably pretty proud of it. Anyway, they had a company come in there and make a movie, and it was all about their volunteer fire department. And I was with a crowd crowding in the stairway. We were supposed to be panicked because of a fire. But I remember the leading lady was Ruby Townsend. She was the daughter of the leading merchant in town. I thought she was quite big for a girl, but I don't remember one of them firemen carrying her down the ladder. Anyway, I see that movie. At first I thought it was all right the first time I saw it, but several years later I saw it again, and gee whiz, what a terrible thing that was. Some of the kids that had been in another movie there just before that, and their part was to ride horses in the distance, and they're supposed to be humped over on horses, and that way they looked like buffaloes. They were supposed to be buffaloes. We'd go to the movies, and it cost 10 cents to get in the movies, and there's silent pictures. We liked to see Tom Mix, Harold Lloyd, Harry Carey, William S. Hart. And they'd have a country store, too, that you'd save the stub of your ticket when you went in, and then later on the man would get up on the stage dressed like a hayseed farmer, and he'd draw numbers out of a hat, or he'd have someone draw them out of a hat, and they'd give you bags of groceries, and these groceries were donated by different merchants. I'll never forget our beds we had when we were kids. The mattresses were made of straw, and once in a while my mother did get a new bale of straw, and they'd take the old straw out and put the new in and sew up the end again. Boy, they were good beds. They were sure warm and soft, and I'd like to have one of them beds today. And I remember one Christmas we were laying in one of them beds, and we were trying to look over the transom to see what we were going to get for Christmas. And, where we saw Santa Claus walking back and forth in front of the window outside. But what was found out later was my brother Orson. He had a pillow over his back. He was trying to look like Santa Claus out there in the dark. We didn't get much for Christmas, but maybe one thing or two things. But it seemed like the main part of Christmas was our stockings. We'd have get the biggest stocking was defined as usually our mother's cotton stockings. They were long and heavy. We'd put them up somewhere. We never had a fireplace. But we'd get coffee, we'd get candy and nuts and orange and apple, banana, anything like that. And that was the main part of our Christmas, I guess. And we used to pull taffy. I remember my sisters and I were pulling taffy once. That's supposed to be white. Well, my sister's taffy was white when they were pulling, but mine got gray. I can remember putting it around the doorknob and pulling it. And I think it was gray because I probably had dirty hands. The first school I went to was just a little school that had first, second, third, and fourth grades, and they were big rooms. There's about between 40 and 50 kids in each room. And they had a big coal stove, a pot-bellied coal stove, up towards the teacher's desk. And I remember sitting around that one cold morning. We were all sitting there staring at the stove when it was real cold. And the darn stove blew out. And doors come open and the soot and black come off all over us. We had a hard time keeping warm in school in them days. Sometimes it gets real cold outside. At this school, they had an outhouse, and they had one for the girls and one for the boys, and it was sit out over a ravine. That was quite a nice place. And the janitor's wife used to make a big pot of soup, and she'd sell it for a nickel, a big bowl of nickel. Gee, it was good soup. I was always anxious to get a nickel so I could get some of that. And I got in trouble at this school with the teacher or the principal, or rather. I got some carbide and was blowing up cans with carbide, and I was reprimanded for that. We had a lot of fun blowing up cans with carbide. That carbide looks, it's a gray stuff. It looks something like sand or limestone, and about the size of crushed gravel. And I take that and dig a little recess in the ground, and put water in it, and put a piece of carbide in it, and put a can over the top of it, an empty can with the open side down, and then it would get a piece of paper and light the bottom of it, and that would blow up, and that can would go sky high. We had a lot of fun doing it. I guess it was kind of dangerous. Next school I went to was Arlington School. That just went to the 6th grade. The bigger kids there. We played baseball, and we had a lot of fun going there. But I remember once when we went there, we went out in someone's chicken coop and got the eggs out from under a hen. There's about 2 dozen of them, I guess, and we took them to the store and we traded them for some cake. Well, I'll bet you somebody got chickens in some of them eggs. One day my friend Harry came down, it was wintertime, to my house, and we got on our ice skates. The streets was all covered with hard-packed snow and glare ice. Everything was just as slick as could be. So on our way to where we went skating, we put our skates on. We skated down the street, right down the middle of the street. There's no cars. Down into town, the town of Murray. And then we went up to the dentist's office. Harry had an appointment with a dentist. And we walked up this long wooden steps with his skates on. He sat in the dentist chair, and I sat alongside him in the chair while the dentist worked on his tooth. And then we walked down the steps and skated up into the park. They had a lake up there that's frozen over. A bunch of people were ice skating. Boy, everything was sure frozen up. We sure had a good time ice skating. We had the old skates you used to clamp on your shoes. A lot of times my shoes weren't very good, and I have a hard time to make the skates stick. The next school I went to was Murray High School. It was a junior-senior high school combined. And before we moved out of town, we moved away from that town, pretty soon, about 2 years after I started this school. And anyway, we used to go up there at nighttime and play in the gym. My father's cousin, he was the head janitor, and we used to go up there in the evening and help him sweep out some rooms, and then he'd let us play in the gym. And we'd run around the track, and we'd play basketball. I remember we never had gym shoes in them days, so we had to go stocking-footed. Kids didn't wear gym shoes in them days, not like they do today. They were, when you did get them, they were just little cheap things. You could buy them for about $1 at J.C. Penney. I remember the man that shoveled coal out of the coal cars. Those coal cars that held 44 tons. The cars there was a tell on each outside of each car what the loaded capacity was. And railroad cars are 44 tons. And the guy, he'd use a short-handled scoop shovel. They're big shovels except with a short handle. And they could unload that car in one day. 44 tons. Boy, they just throw it over the side. They work down to the bottom of the car in one end, and then away they'd go. They were covered. They were black as could be. My brothers played baseball. Well, 3 of my older brothers. Earl, he was a catcher. He's about 8 years older than I am. He was a catcher. He was the youngest one on the team, I guess. And Orson and Newell, they played ball. We used to go down and watch them quite a bit. Guess my brother Orson could have went on to professional baseball if he'd have wanted to. He sure should have done, because his life wasn't a very good one. One day my friend Harry come down. He wanted to go up to Utah Lake. That's about 30 miles south. Go out there and look for some friends of his. He says, we're camped out there. They weren't friends. They were older men. They promised to take him to California when they left. But they left without telling him. So I went down there with him to look for him. And anyway, we came home. And we were trying to get rides. We couldn't. It was getting dark. So we laid down at dark. We laid down alongside the road in the grass to sleep. And when we got up in the morning, there was frost all over everything. The farmer woke us up, coming down just before daylight. He come down the road with his heavy shoes on. He must have had wooden shoes, because, boy, they were sure was noisy. I remember when we went to that Arlington school, they had a wagon train come through. That is a real wagon train, horses and teams, you know. And they were coming from eastern Utah, from where they have all the dinosaur bones. Well, this big long caravan was going from the dig where they get these bones to the University of Utah. And we knew some people who had a relative who headed that wagon train. But they let school out to go down and watch that train come through. I don't know how many days they were on the road, but that was a frontier-type train if I ever saw one. One day, my friend Harry come running over to my house, and he said his sister was after him, and his sister was going to kill him. So he was going to run away. So I told him I'd run away with him, because actually he's my best friend, so there's nothing else I could do. We went out through the field there, and we got down there in a dry irrigation ditch. We got down out of sight where his sister couldn't see him, and made our plans. Well, we were going to go to California and get a job. We weren't very old, about 10 years old. Anyway, we were going to California and get a job, and we figured all we had to do was go down there where we picked up coal. And when the train come and got water, when they stopped for water, all we had to do was jump on and we'd go to California. We didn't realize at the time there were nothing but local switch engines. We would have got nowhere. Anyway, we gave that up by the end of the day. We decided not to go to California. When I was about 12 years old, we used to hitchhike rides out to the point of the mountain. That's where Utah Valley and Salt Lake Valley come together. There's a rise there, and the highway went up and around that point. We go there and look for Indian arrowheads. Well, I never found any, but the kids I went with, they had a lot of them. They've been going there for several years. Their older brother used to go there before they did. Anyway, we'd thumb rides down there, and it was awful hard to get a ride. And we stuck together so that we made sure we all got there. Either we didn't get there or we didn't. And anyway, we'd stay together. And quite often we'd egg on the driver to see how fast his car would go. And boy, I remember once we had a ride over 80 miles an hour in an open automobile. It was a big car. That was pretty fast in them days. But if we got to this point of the mountain, we'd looked around in the rocks where the wind had blown the sand away from the rocks. That's where they found the arrowheads. And they had a gravel pit there. And at the bottom of the gravel pit, they had a shed there and a place for loading the gravel. Must have been on a weekend because there was no one working around the place. So we went down in this shed here, and there's a box of dynamite in there. So we took a stick of that dynamite, and we left. And we went up on top there again, and we started throwing that dynamite around at rocks and things, and it wouldn't go off. And we even slammed it down on the cement pavement right alongside of our foot, and it wouldn't go off. We didn't know anything about dynamite in them days, but I found out since that the dynamite was fresh, so that's why it wouldn't go off. You have to have a detonator to make it go off. You have to have a giant cap. You embed the giant cap inside the dynamite, and then put a fuse into the giant cap. That's how they done it. But when it gets old, the nitroglycerine in it forms into pockets, and that'll explode. But so you have to be real careful when it's old. I guess they just destroy old dynamite. That's the best way to get rid of it. Boy, talk about your dumb kids. I think I was the dumbest kid in the world. We sure used to get hungry and thirsty. There was no water to drink down there and nothing to eat all day long. Boy, we sure used to get hungry. Something that happened when I was a little kid, about the time I was pulling taffy, when I supposed to have white taffy and it turned out gray. Well, I think I was about 5 years old then. I remember tying string to my loose tooth and then on the doorknob, and then sitting there in a chair waiting for someone to open the door. But I don't remember the tooth coming out. I got an idea I chickened out. But I remember tying a string to my tooth and then to an iron, a flat iron. They heated them on the stove to iron clothes with, and used a pot holder on the handle so you wouldn't burn your hand. They're heavy things. And I remember tying the string to one of them and walking around with it, trying to get up the courage to drop it. I don't remember dropping it. I bet I chickened out that time, too. In the fall of 1925, my father come home from work all doubled up in pain. He was in great pain. And we had a hard time getting a doctor. There was a doctor lived up the street a little ways. He was the company doctor where my dad had been working for the smelter. And he was at a party and he didn't want to come home, but he finally come and we put my dad in the hospital, the St. Mark's Hospital. That's the company hospital. That's the north end of Seattle. That's the hospital I worked in later on. But he was in there and for a long time, and then finally on January the 15th of 1926, he died. The doctor's report said he died of pneumonia, but my older sister said he died of a broken heart. And I think she's right, because I can see after losing Mom, I can see how a person could just waste away and die. Well, he left some insurance, $2,000 life insurance, and my mother bought a little house for $1,600 in Salt Lake, it was, and for just the 3 rooms, and the flush toilet was outside in an adjoining place. You had to go out on the back porch and through this other door to the toilet. There was no heat out there. Boy, it sure used to get cold. It wasn't much of a house, but at least it was ours. There was 5 of us at home, and I was the oldest one. By the time my dad died, I was 14. And my mother used to get in bed at night with the other 4 kids, and she'd sing to them. She'd sing the song that she learned in England when she was a girl. Well, I guess my father finally got a little home for us. It was through his efforts that it was our home, so it was the first one we'd ever had. I understand he had a home in Kemmer, Wyoming, when he first quit the mines. But that was the only home we'd had outside of that. We always rented. He was only 54 years old when he died. And he had been a carpenter ever since he left the mines. When they had the big explosion in the Alamy coal mine, why he quit the mines and he went to work building. He built several homes in Kemmer, Wyoming, and my sister Mary thinks that they're still there. I'd like to know which ones they were. I'd like to go there again and see them. But they moved around. They settled in Murray. That's where I remember growing up. My father was a smart man. He didn't have much schooling, but he educated himself. He learned. He taught himself to read music, He taught himself mathematics, which he had to have to when he used to figure jobs, and he'd build these buildings. Sometimes he built quite large buildings, and he had to draw the plans for him. He took the place of the architect. He had mechanical drawing tools. I remember him using them, and he had a drawing table. He had a good voice too, because he sang a lot. He had a real good voice. And he used to read the funny papers, and he'd read Maggie and Jiggs, and he sure laughed at them. But I couldn't understand what he was laughing at, because I didn't think that was funny at all. I was a kid then, you know, and my idea of something funny was the Kessenjander kids for Salesman Sam. He had a large funeral, a very large funeral. It's the largest funeral I've ever seen. And they had a judge spoke at his funeral, and they had 4 cornet players play. They were real good at it. I guess they played with the Woodman of the World Band. He played in the Woodman World Band. He played a tuba. And he worked himself up to Council Commander in the Woodman of the World. That's quite a high position. My mother got a widow's pension at $20 a month in Salt Lake. Now, I don't know whether it come from the city or the state or where, but it sure helped out. We would have starved to death, I think, if it hadn't been for that. I used to bring in a little money at times working whenever I could work, and it's kind of hard for me to work because nobody wanted to hire a kid, I guess. I always blamed it on the Depression, but maybe it was a matter of both of them. But anyway, I didn't work too much. When things did open up, I started working with my brothers. We done shingling and lathing, you know, and other little jobs. We built houses too. My older brother Luke and my brother Earl, I worked building houses with them, and I learned a lot about home building and carpenter work. They were real experts at it. When I was 16 years old, I used to work on the job and sit on the roof putting on shingles and take home as much money as the men did there. I don't think they cared much about that. In the winter, I went ice skating quite a lot, but my skates weren't much too good. They were the kind that screwed onto your everyday shoes. They were hard on shoes, too. They'd pull them apart. And I used to read a lot. I'd go to the library and get books. I remember going through all of Zane Grey's books. Boy, I thought they were great. I'd take one of them books home and I'd sit down and read it and read the whole thing right through and go back up and get another one. I read other books, too. I read The Prodigal Judge and a lot of them. I used to like Edgar Allan Poe. I'd say he was one of my favorites. I liked his, too. And I used to play solitary, too. Boy, I played a million hands of solitary. I played so much solitary that I won 3 hands in a row. Well, you've got to play a lot of solitary for that to happen. There's not a chance in 1,000 of that ever happening. And that same summer after my father died, 1926, my mother took us 5 kids up to Wyoming to visit our aunts and uncles and cousins. And they lived in the town of Oakley. Most of them did. One of them lived up north of Kemmer in the town of Frontier. That was Aunt and Uncle Henry Smith. They had a daughter, June, and a son, Henry. Henry was my age. But the others lived in Oakley. That's a little town that's gone now. The freeway is going right through where the town was. And my relatives worked in the mines. But he came down, and one of my older cousins came down in his Nash touring car and took us up there. It was a good road up to a few miles out of Evanston, and then we took a dirt road north to Oakley. It's 50 miles of dirt road. We passed a mine that was still smoking up there. It was burning underground. It had been burning for 50 years, they said. Well, when we got up there, we stayed at my uncle Bill Ball's place. And his son, Les, was my age, too. But What I remember most about this was the hunting, the sage-grouse hunting. It was open 2 weeks, from the 1st of August till the 15th. And they were allowed 6 chickens a day. They call them sage chickens. And boy, they were sure good eating. They're all white meat. They were quite easy to get, too. We'd walk down the draws, and these things were in droves, and they'd get up ahead of you and fly away from you. A bird flying away from you is easy to knock down because the shot goes under the feathers. Anyway, they were allowed 6 a day. And they went out every day after work and got a limit. There was no trouble at all to get a limit. That was real hunting. I'll bet there's nothing like that today. And that was quite a place, that mine. I never did get down into it, but my cousin Les, my age, he had a job delivering coal to the people who worked in the mines. He had a horse and wagon. It's a small wagon. It would hold half a ton of coal. And I used to went with him. We'd shovel the coal in the wagon, and he'd shovel it out when we got to the people's place. And it cost $2 for a load. And my one uncle, Uncle Jesse Peterson, he was the engineer. He worked up in the engine room, and he brought the mine cars out of the mine, and he had these 2 big wheels. They were about 12 feet high and 10 feet wide, and they had this heavy cable on them. There's 2 of them. And he'd sit there under controls, and he'd get these signals that come from down in the mine. The bell would ring whenever they wanted that car moved. And he'd sit in that chair there like a king on a throne. That was quite a job he had. My other Uncle Lonnie Peterson, he was a check weighman. When the cars come out of the mine, they were all coupled together, about 10 of them, and each car would hold about a ton of coal, I guess, maybe 2 tons. They'd come up out of that mine, and when they come up the slope, why, they'd automatically unhook. And they'd space themselves when they went over the scale. And Uncle Lonnie, he'd weigh it while it was moving. And after each car, the check would come, or rather a round disc with the miner's number on it, and he'd get credit for that, because they were piecework. That was sure interesting to watch all that stuff. But I'll never forget that 2 weeks, or that time we spent in Wyoming. I guess it was 3 weeks. We went camping and caught a lot of fish, and had a lot of sage-grouse to eat. We sure had a lot of fun. My aunt put some sage chickens up in jars. Boy, she had a big job doing that. But they were good. They had a lot of that stuff to eat. Well, imagine 6 chickens a day. They're big. They're the biggest grouse in America. They weigh 5 and 6 pounds apiece. And something else. There was buffalo chips laying all over it. And then my cousin says that's buffalo chips. And I didn't want to believe him, but I guess he's right. They didn't look like cow chips to me. There sure isn't any around there now. The last time I was up there, we never saw any. But evidently they were buffalo chips. I don't know how in the world they stayed there that long, but maybe it hadn't been too many years since they'd had a herd of buffalo up there. It was all wild country. There was no fences or anything around there, just prairie grass. We used to watch for new houses under construction, and we'd go there and hit up the contractor for a job putting on his shingles or putting on the wood lath in the house. It's usually the carpenters don't like to do that because it takes them too long. It takes a special skill, not necessarily a special skill, but it takes practice. It takes a lot of practice. And you get so you can do it very fast. You can do it 3 or 4 times faster than the average carpenter that still knows how to do it, but seldom does it. So we'd hit up the contractor for the job, and quite often we'd get a job. He'd ask us how much we charged. Usually we charged $1.50 a square. That's 100 square feet, and it took 4 bundles of shingles to cover it. Well, we'd done that whenever we could, but sometimes there was no houses at all going up. But we'd done anything else we could find. I remember one job we got, the new house. It was the only house we could find anywhere, and we asked the contractor if we could do the job, and he says, how much? Well, he says $1.50 a square. Well, he says, he'll wait and see. And we went back again, and he says, I got somebody who will do it for $1.25. So we said, well, we'll do it for $1.15 a square. Well, he says, you come back and I'll see. And I went back. The other guy says he'd do it for $1.05 a square. So we says, we'll do it for 90 cents a square if you give us the job right now. So he gave us the job. When it was ready, we went over there and we done it, my brother-in-law and I. We done it in one day. That's 16 squares of shingles, 64 wooden bundles of shingles. That's a lot of shingles. I don't know how many hours we worked, but we done it in one day. We gave him about a 90-cent job, I think. It couldn't have been too good a job, but at least we done the job and we made as much money as we would have done, I guess, if we'd have gotten more per square. I remember one job we got, the brother-in-law and I, we cleaned the stain off of the tile in the front end of a store. Not the front end of a store, but the entranceway. It's a big entranceway, and all little tile there, and they were stained up pretty bad. So the fellow that owned the store there, he gave us the job cleaning that off. We had big chunks of pumice stone, and we had to rub that. And we worked a long day. We were there about 14 hours working on that thing before we got it done. So when we got all through, that guy gave us 75 cents apiece. Boy, what a stinker. And another time I remember my brother Newell and I heard of a new job out by the airport. It was quite a ways out there. And, there wasn't none of the houses or anything on the way out there like there is today. The houses were only about halfway out, and then it was nothing out there but dry country. Anyway, I had a horse's bicycle at the time, and so we started riding out there on that bicycle, my brother Newell and I. We tried riding double, but it was too hard to pump. You know, we were full-grown men, and that was a hard job. So when we come back, we devised this scheme. One of us would ride and the other walk. Well, the one that would ride on past the one walking, then lay the bicycle down alongside of the road and start walking himself. And when the other one come up with the bicycle, he'd get on it and ride on past the other one and lay it down. We leapfrogged that way all the way into town. I don't know if we saved any money or not saved any time or not, but one of us was walking all the time. Of course, one of us was riding part of the time, too. I never figured out if we saved time or traveled less on foot or not. I think all of you have seen the Wasatch Mountains there in Salt Lake Valley. The short, high and rugged mountains. They rise more than 7,000 feet above the valley floor. Now, those two peaks on the end of the valley, the last one is Lone Peak. That's 11,500 foot elevation. And the peak this way, the peak north of there, is Twin Peaks. There's two peaks together, right close together. And that's just the top of one mountain, there's two peaks. And the West Twin is 11,437 foot elevation. I hiked over the top of that one time. My nephew Jimmy Graves and his friend, one of the Averill boys, and I was dropped off at the foot of the mountain there in the valley side. And we hiked until dark and a long time after dark on the way up there. It's a 12-mile hike. And my nephew, Jimmy Graves, he could tell the time by looking at the stars. I never could figure out how he done that until till 2 or 3 years ago. It has to do with the handle on the Big Dipper. That handle goes around like a hand on a clock, and you use it as an hour hand. And at different times, different seasons, it's in different positions, so it changes. It changes all the time, so you have to know what part of the season you're in and where that hand is at a given time. Then you can tell pretty accurate what time it is. Well, I thought that was remarkable. Hey, we hiked up the top of that thing. We slept for a while at night, and the next morning we got up and finished the hike. And the peak looks fairly smooth from the valley floor, but when you got up there, boy, them rocks are big as automobiles, some of them even bigger than houses. Anyway, there was right at the very tip, there's a pile of rocks with a mailbox buried.
there. And there was a book in there and a pencil, and we put our name on that thing. I wonder if it's still up there. I'd sure like to find somebody who's been up there lately and see. Well, on that trip, we continued on over to this Lake Blanche. We always call it Lake Blanche. There's 3 lakes. And to get to these lakes, you go up the canyon. Then you hike up the creek to these lakes. It's 3.5 miles. I've been up there many times. It was a favorite place for all of us to go. And the fishing up there at times was very good. The fish were hard and just like an icicle when you held them in your hand. And the water was real cold. You couldn't stand to drink much of it. That was sure a great place to go. I know one time I went up there with Mom before we were married. My brother Luke and his wife and his son Don went along. Don had a horse that he used for a pack horse. Evidently he didn't know how to throw a diamond hitch because I remember that pack kept coming off of the horse. Anyway, we got up to that lake. There's a cabin up there, and there's two men in the cabin. So my brother Luke, he says, you put my hat on. He told me to put his hat on. He had a hat that looked like a forest ranger's hat. He said, you put my hat on, and you go over there and tell him we come up to work on the cabin. So that's what I done, and these 2 men moved out, so then we moved into the cabin. And we made out like we was working around that cabin, you know, we could chinking up between the logs on the outside and look busy. But it was quite a trip. And Mom, she didn't like onions and she didn't like rare meat, you know, and nobody was going to make her eat it. But my brother Luke, he's kidding her all the time, you know, and that's the way he's going to cook the meals. But boy, she didn't like that at all. Anyway, we got home and nobody home. I had to boost her up into a window so she could get into the house. That was some trip. That was a long trip for a girl, you know, 3.5, and it was a tough trip. It was about, the last half a mile you was on your hands and knees on the loose shale slide. I remember trying to catch a squirrel in that cabin. He was running around in the logs, and finally I grabbed it by the tail, and darn if all the hide didn't come off its tail. And that poor thing running around there without a tail, just its skin. One job we had was putting some seats in a moving picture theater. My older sister's husband, Jim Graves, he followed that line of work, and he got a job. Things were real bad at this time, and there's no jobs anywhere. But he got this job of exchanging the seats in the theater in Salt Lake. So he got us together, me and a couple of my brothers and a couple of brother-in-laws, and we changed all them seats. We took the old ones out, struck lines along the floor, and laid them out so that they'd be just right, and put the other ones down. They had to screw them down. There was, if I remember right, it was 8 long screws into each seat, and they went into them hardwood floors. And they had to screw them all the way down, and boy, it was a hard job. They had blisters on our hands. Every one of us had blisters on our hands. It took about 3 days, I believe. And we made $4 a day, and that was good money in them days. It's too bad we couldn't work steady at it. But my brother-in-law, he divided that money with everybody, got the same, even himself. He done that to help everybody out a little. My brother Luke done that a couple of times too. He'd get a remodeling job, and he didn't know whether he could make much on it, so he'd offer us a fair share, and he wouldn't take any more than we got. In 1927, I think I was 15 years old, and my friend Turk Mahoney, they call him Turk, everybody, but his name was Sterling, but I never heard anybody call him Sterling except our school teacher. Anyway, he said they were hiring men up in Yellowstone Park, and if we went up there, we could get a job. They were clearing the brush away from the highway. So we left Salt Lake east up through Parley's Canyon. We were going through the south entrance. That was the closest. And when we got way up there, about 30 miles out of Salt Lake, we stopped at a sheep camp. And a man there with his wagon and horses, and a regular sheep camp. And he said the south entrance is still closed. It snowed in. So we had to change plans, and we kept on going and went up to the Weber River and then down the Weber River to Ogden. about 40 miles from where we started, and we traveled about 100 miles altogether. The next day we reached Pocatello, Idaho, and we got a hotel. I got a room in the hotel there, and that was really a dump. It was upstairs, and these rooms were made in a big ballroom, evidently, and they put some partitions up with no ceilings. And there was a double bed in there. It cost 25 cents. This double bed was swayed down in the middle. The springs and the mattress both swayed way down. There was no sheets on the bed. There was just some heavy quilts. I guess we were warm enough, but gee, what a dive. You could hear people snoring and breathing and talking, and in the middle of the night, you could hear someone clumping up the stairs. They woke us up, and the man went over towards the stairs there, and the guy says, "You got any girls?" He says, "Yeah." So he called out, "Oh, Flossie." And pretty soon this girl come over, and it sounded like someone with light footsteps, you know. We figured it was a girl. He says, "You want this girl?" He says, "No," and he left. He went back down the stairs again. Boy, that was